Jeremiah Cole had never asked for trouble, never invited confrontation, and certainly never imagined that the land his grandfather had fought to keep would become the battleground of a modern war. Not one of guns or fists, but of fences, power, and pride. Nestled in the heart of Texas, the 200-acre spread of Cole Ranch was a legacy left by Jeremiah's grandfather, a man who had once survived Jim Crow, carved out his dream with calloused hands, and told his grandson, "Protect this land like you'd protect your family." And Jeremiah had, through 2 tours in Afghanistan as an army engineer, through long nights rebuilding the old barn with nothing but a headlamp and sweat, through droughts, storms, and the quiet prejudice that still lingered like smoke on the wind in the surrounding towns. By his 40th birthday, he had restored the land, built a smart, solar-powered home, started a small cattle operation, and even ran a weekend horse training program for troubled youth. But all of that peace, that hard-won stability, began to unravel the day he saw it. A freshly installed, 10-foot-high white vinyl fence slicing through the eastern boundary of his property, complete with private HOA property, no trespassing signs bolted into the posts like a middle finger etched in plastic, and blocking what had, for generations, been the ranch's main access road to the county highway. At first, Jeremiah thought it was a mistake, a rogue contractor or a surveying error, until he walked the length of the fence and found HOA President Doug Whitman standing smugly at the end of the line, arms crossed and polo shirt tucked neatly over a growing belly, clipboard in hand and 2 HOA board members in tow, all looking at Jeremiah like he was the trespasser. "Sir," Doug had said with a forced smile, "this land falls within our community's jurisdiction now. Our new perimeter initiative covers this space for the safety of our residents." And when Jeremiah replied calmly that his deed said otherwise, Doug chuckled and muttered something about people not understanding how zoning works. Jeremiah could smell the condescension under every syllable, could hear the unsaid words dancing just beneath the surface, words like "you people" and "don't cause a scene." And that night, as he sat on the porch staring at the fence, where there should have been an open road, he felt the familiar tightness of wartime clarity settle into his chest, the kind that said, assess, adapt, respond. He didn't curse, didn't shout, didn't grab a chainsaw or make threats. Instead, he pulled out his grandfather's old property ledger, a stack of yellowed papers sealed in plastic, and laid them out on the table next to a digital map of the development that had slowly grown over the past decade like mold creeping toward his pasture. What he found made his lips curl into a slow, deliberate smile. Not only did he still own the access road, which technically extended through the development's eastern edge, but the easement the HOA assumed was public had reverted to him years ago when the county vacated it due to underuse. For years, Jeremiah had allowed residents to use the road out of goodwill, never making an issue of it. But now that goodwill had been mistaken for weakness. The next morning, while HOA board members celebrated their new boundary, Jeremiah drove into town and began drafting a plan so ironclad, so legally sound, it would flip the script without a single raised voice. He hired a land use attorney, resurveyed the property, filed the necessary municipal paperwork, and quietly began designing a gate system with license plate readers, solar panels, cameras, and a payment kiosk, all to turn what had once been a dusty road into a fully private toll access, one with tiered pricing, annual passes, and commercial vehicle surcharges. So over the next 2 weeks, the fence remained, standing tall like a monument to petty entitlement. But Jeremiah didn't touch it. Instead, he built, wired, coded, and readied the gate. And when the day came, he sent a letter to every resident, in the HOA letting them know that as of Monday, access to County Road 17 through the Eastern Cut would require payment or rerouting. Most laughed, some ignored it, and others raged. But by Monday morning, when commuters found themselves stuck at a gate demanding $5 per car or $200 for an annual pass, the panic set in. By noon, Doug Whitman was red-faced and yelling on the phone, demanding Jeremiah take down this nonsense, to which Jeremiah calmly responded, "I'm just protecting my property, same as you." And by the end of the week, with cars backing up during school drop-offs, delivery trucks rerouting miles around, and residents fuming, The HOA realized they had woken the wrong man, one who didn't fight back with fists but with facts, patience, and the quiet, calculating fury of someone who had once cleared EDs with his bare hands. The battle lines were drawn, but Jeremiah had already won the first round. Not with force, but with foresight, proving that even when fenced in, a man with his land and his mind intact could find a way out and make you pay for every step you tried to take over him. The moment Jeremiah Cole activated the toll gate on the Eastern Road, the quiet tension that had simmered between him and the HOA burst into a wildfire of confusion, anger, and legal scrambling, not just because a rancher had dared to resist their authority, but because he had done it with precision, confidence, and documentation so airtight it left them no legal ground to stand on. The first few days were chaos. Cars backed up half a mile, school buses diverted, and Amazon deliveries delayed, all because one black man, whom they had underestimated, now stood at the center of the very infrastructure they relied on daily. And the irony wasn't lost on him as he sipped his coffee from the ranch porch and watched their frustration grow by the hour. The gate, complete with solar-powered cameras, a sleek payment kiosk and license plate recognition, ran smoother than anyone expected, and Jeremiah had set the tolls modestly at first, $5 for a single use, $200 for a year pass, with discounts, for school buses and emergency vehicles, not out of spite but to make a point. Respect land ownership and treat your neighbors as equals, or pay the cost of arrogance. Meanwhile, Doug Whitman, the HOA president, was unraveling. What he thought had been a victorious power move by fencing off Jeremiah's access road had instead exposed his ignorance of property law and his own development's dependence on a stretch of land they didn't own. Doug called emergency HOA meetings, fired off angry letters, and even tried calling the sheriff to do something, only to be told that Jeremiah's actions were perfectly legal. His land, his road, his toll, desperation mounting, the HOA filed for a temporary injunction, hoping the court would force Jeremiah to lift the toll gate. But when the court date arrived, Jeremiah, dressed in clean jeans, boots, and a blazer, walked in with his lawyer and a stack of titles, easement documents, and satellite maps dating back 40 years, laying out the exact sequence of legal events that made his toll road not just valid, but brilliant. The original road had been a county easement that reverted to him when the county formally abandoned it in 2009. The HOA's development, built a few years later, had been approved with the assumption that the road would remain publicly maintained, but no one followed up, and Jeremiah, seeing no reason to speak up at the time, simply let them use it without fuss, until they built a fence on his land. When the judge asked why the fence was placed where it was, Jeremiah handed over drone footage, showing the fence clearly intruding onto his recorded land, prompting an audible gasp in the courtroom and a visible twitch from Doug. The ruling was swift. Jeremiah retained full rights to the road and could operate it as a private toll access as long as emergency services had free passage, which he had already granted voluntarily. The HOA lost face, the case, and control over their narrative, and back at the ranch, Jeremiah received an unexpected gift, a letter of apology from a few residents, including a retired schoolteacher and a young couple who thanked him for standing up not just for himself, but for landowners everywhere who were tired of being pushed around by bloated, arrogant HOAs, drunk on power and short on wisdom. With the legal victory behind him, Jeremiah expanded the toll system, adding app-based payment, tracking analytics to adjust peak rates, and even offering community credits to residents who volunteered time at local non-profits, something he framed as earning your way across my road. Some residents saw the fairness in his system, others grumbled, but all of them paid. And every dime collected went not into Jeremiah's pocket, but into a community improvement fund he created to fix rural roads, fund scholarships for local kids, and subsidize farming co-ops in the area, a detail that further embarrassed the HOA when a local news story highlighted it with the headline, "Rancher charges toll to HOA, then uses money to help their kids." The backlash against the HOA leadership was swift, with multiple resignations, including Doug Whitman, who slunk away after his humiliating defeat, replaced by a younger, more level-headed interim president who reached out to Jeremiah in hopes of brokering peace. Jeremiah agreed to meet, not out of obligation but out of principle, because the point had never been revenge, it had always been respect. And now that he had it, he was willing to talk terms, though he made it clear, the pay. Road stays, the toll stays, and any future actions involving his land would go through him, not around him. As they shook hands under the same sun that had once watched a fence go up, Jeremiah knew he had done more than just defend his land. He had flipped the script on a system that assumed power gave people the right to trample others, and he did. It with grace, law, and unshakable calm. He wasn't just a rancher now. He was a symbol of resistance wrapped in a Stetson, standing tall at the crossroads of justice and legacy, and the gate. It stood not as a barrier, but as a reminder that no one, no matter how entitled, has the right to block a man from his home and walk away without paying the toll. By the time the first full month of Jeremiah Cole's toll road operation came to a close, the entire county knew his name. Not as just another black rancher tucked away behind pastures and pine trees, but as the man who flipped the script on. A wealthy homeowners association with nothing but patience, paperwork, and pride. And now as the media ran headlines like "The Rancher Who Made the HOA Pay" and "Texas Man Turns HOA into Revenue Stream," his life had turned into a quiet storm of calls, letters, and interviews from land rights advocates, rural property owners, and even political figures who saw his stand as a blueprint for grassroots resistance against overreach. Meanwhile, inside the once smug HOA community of Willow Creek Estates, the mood had shifted from fury to fractured reflection. Residents now realized their board's arrogance had not only blocked access to a man's ancestral land, but triggered a wave of costs and inconveniences that showed no signs of stopping, especially now that Jeremiah had announced dynamic toll rates. $5 remained the base fare, but during peak hours, mornings and evenings, the price jumped to $10, with heavy trucks paying more and late-night access requiring a prepaid pass. Suddenly, the road was no longer invisible infrastructure. It was a reminder every single day of the consequences of disrespect, and while some neighbors adapted, others pushed back harder, forming small but vocal factions calling for a lawsuit, revival, or even county intervention, ignoring the fact that every court, county official, and sheriff had already ruled in Jeremiah's favor. Meanwhile, Jeremiah stayed above the noise, focusing instead on refining his operation. He installed a secondary backup power grid for the gate, improved the mobile payment system, and even hired 2 young veterans to help monitor the road, paying them out of the toll revenue and offering them training in small business management, turning what was once a legal defense mechanism into a small but thriving ecosystem of opportunity. On Saturdays, he hosted open land days, inviting school kids, city folk, and curious onlookers to learn about ranch life, land rights, and the deep roots Black Americans had in Texas agriculture, an aspect often erased from local history books, but now front and center, thanks to Jeremiah's voice, presence, and persistence. One day, a group of local college students showed up with a film crew to shoot a documentary titled "The Road He Owns," and Jeremiah, ever calm, welcomed them in with a nod and walked them through every inch of his journey, from the day he saw that fence to the moment he signed the last toll agreement, never bragging, just telling the truth as it was, with clarity and quiet strength. But behind the scenes, the HOA wasn't done scheming. Though Doug Whitman had resigned in disgrace, 2 of his allies still sat on the board and began conspiring with a newly hired HOA attorney, hoping to exploit obscure zoning ordinances and petition the county for eminent domain, essentially attempting to seize the road from Jeremiah under the pretense of public necessity. When Jeremiah received notice of the upcoming petition, he didn't panic. Instead, he went straight to the county commissioner's office with a full file of historical land use, tax records, and a new petition of his own to designate the road as a cultural heritage corridor, citing its significance as part of one of the oldest black-owned ranches in the state, complete with testimonials from professors, community leaders, and even a few Willow Creek residents who had come to see him not as an enemy, but as a steward of something rare and necessary in a state increasingly gobbled up by concrete and corporations. The commissioner, impressed by Jeremiah's preparation and reputation, put the HOA's petition on hold and initiated a heritage review, effectively freezing any attempt at seizure and putting the HOA board on the defensive once again. What they had hoped would be a silent procedural move became a public spectacle, as local news caught wind of the fight, framing it as a David and Goliath battle, with Jeremiah now wielding the support of history, community, and legal precedent. In response, the HOA president issued a tone-deaf public statement blaming miscommunication and confusion over land usage, which only backfired as clips of the original fence line encroaching on Jeremiah's land resurfaced online, reigniting outrage. The toll road, meanwhile, became a kind of pilgrimage for rural property owners. People came from neighboring counties just to drive it, pay the toll, and shake Jeremiah's hand, many of them telling their own stories of how they'd been bullied or boxed out by HOAs, developers, or banks. And so, with each passing day, the road changed. No longer just a stretch of dirt and asphalt, but a monument to one man's refusal to back down, a living classroom, and a tollway to truth, where every dollar collected reminded drivers that land has memory, dignity, and value beyond what a spreadsheet or HOA covenant can define. And Jeremiah, he remained exactly who he had always been, a rancher, a veteran, a man of few words but absolute conviction, tending to his land, caring for his horses, and standing at the very gate that once separated him from justice, now watching, as the world passed through, one car at a time, paying the toll not just in money, but in recognition, respect, and a newfound understanding that the soil under our feet belongs to those who honor it, protect it, and never, ever surrender it to the highest bidder. Months passed, and what had begun as a retaliatory toll road became something much greater. A symbol, a lesson, and a lasting legacy that no one, not even Jeremiah Cole himself, could have foreseen when he first found that illegal fence slicing through his pasture and dared to fight back. The toll road thrived not just financially but socially. What was once a simple driveway transformed into a powerful message about land, rights, dignity, and what happens when a man of integrity refuses to be pushed aside. Visitors from across the state and beyond came to see the road that made the HOA pay. Schoolteachers brought busloads of students to meet Jeremiah. Historians documented his story as part of Texas black ranching heritage, and more than one journalist called it a quiet revolution led by a man in boots. Meanwhile, the HOA, stripped of its power, humiliated in court and fractured by internal resignations, struggled to hold itself together and eventually dissolved its board leadership entirely under pressure from residents who had grown tired of paying not just the toll but the social price of being aligned with arrogance. In its place, a new community council was formed, one that invited Jeremiah to its first meeting, not as a token gesture, but to offer him a permanent advisory seat, an act that marked a full-circle moment few thought possible when tensions first erupted. Jeremiah, after consulting with his sister and a few trusted friends, accepted with one condition: that the community adopt a binding resolution acknowledging the road's heritage value and pledging to never again attempt to infringe upon his property, a motion that passed unanimously and earned a standing ovation from both new residents and those who had once stood on the other side of the fence. In this new chapter, Jeremiah continued to invest toll proceeds into the region, not just for roads and scholarships, but also for community gardens, disaster relief supplies, and even launching a summer ranch camp where urban kids learned how to ride horses, raise livestock, and understand the value of the land beneath their feet. One particularly emotional moment came when a young boy from Houston stood in front of Jeremiah at the campfire and said, "I want to grow up to own my own land like you," to which Jeremiah quietly handed him a seedling oak and replied, "Start by planting this. Roots come before branches." His legacy deepened with each act, and so did his visibility, drawing attention from state leaders who invited him to speak on rural land rights, from university scholars who published papers on his victory, and from thousands of landowners who now cited his case as precedent whenever they faced unlawful pressure from HOAs, developers, or overreaching municipalities. Yet despite the attention, Jeremiah never changed. He still woke before dawn to feed the animals, still rode the fence lines at sunset, and still sat on his porch every evening with a cup of coffee and the toll gate in view, not out of pride, but because that gate represented more than a toll. It was a line drawn in the soil between submission and sovereignty. One crisp morning, nearly a year after the conflict began, Jeremiah received an unexpected guest, the widow of the original developer who had designed Willow Creek Estates decades earlier, a white woman in her 70s who introduced herself simply as Margaret and said, "My husband always meant for this land to respect its neighbors. I'm sorry that got lost along the way." She handed him a dusty folder filled with hand-drawn maps, personal letters, and an early proposal for the neighborhood that included a cooperative ranch agreement that had never come to fruition. Jeremiah studied it, then smiled and said, "Maybe we can finally bring it to life." And within weeks he proposed a community grazing partnership, allowing part of his unused pasture to support local agriculture education, 4-H programs, and farm-to-table initiatives in exchange for labor, upkeep, and respect. The move made headlines again. The man they tried to fence out now feeds the neighborhood, and the gate, still standing, still functioning, became less a barrier and more a threshold, marking not where division started, but where mutual respect began. By the time the first anniversary of the toll road came around, Jeremiah hosted a community barbecue on the ranch, with music, speeches, laughter, and even the toll gate propped open for the day. Not as a concession, but as a celebration of what had been learned, earned, and reclaimed. Among the crowd were ranchers, students, veterans, local business owners, and more than a few HOA residents who now viewed Jeremiah not just as a neighbor, but as a mentor, a guardian of tradition, and a living example of how power bends to truth when one man is brave enough to stand alone and hold the line. That night, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the stars came out over the Texas sky, Jeremiah sat quietly by the fire, his dog at his feet, listening to the voices of a community once divided, now gathered, and reflected on everything that had changed, not just the road, the fence, or the power structures, but the understanding that land is more than dirt. It's memory, freedom, and the place where your story begins and ends on your terms. And as he stood to head back inside, he looked once more at the gate, smiled faintly, and said to himself, "Funny how fences can keep people out or bring them together."